and welcome to another episode of Tech and Test with me, Peter Johnson. Today we have Harish Chandramowli. Hello, Harish. Welcome to Tech and Test.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. Do you want to introduce yourself a little bit to the Tech and Test audience?
I am the founder of Flat Software. We are fashion-specific ERP platform. If you don't know ERP, it's pretty much when you even place an order in a website, there is a huge amount of automations and workflows that happens behind the scenes in every store. And we help automate those operations for our customers so that they can operate effectively. And yeah, it's been a big journey. And if you want like a little bit of the background on where I am and how I am here, it's going to be a very different. I did my master's in cybersecurity at Johns Hopkins, and I joined Bloomberg as a software engineer because I always loved building things and and kind of like it didn't excite me to join as security consultant because that doesn't feel like something I would enjoy. So I joined Bloomberg as a software engineer, and then suddenly like one manager popped up and be like, "Hey, you might not know this, but we have an engineering team in software development. Now everyone knows about Okta. Everyone knows about being a software developer in security. But like 10 years back, I did not know about it. But the opportunity kind of like fell into place when I joined Bloomberg. So I was there for like 5 years working on pretty much like security related projects for their data center and like access to all those crazy number of machines. That led me to join MongoDB, which is a database company, as their first cloud security engineer. MongoDB just launched Atlas, and they were like, "Hey, if we need to now like expand to like banking and other industries, we have to put even more emphasis on security and build out a security team." And I joined them, helped build out their cloud security team for 5 years. It has been a great ride. And part of that was like I was on call for MongoDB Cloud. I saw how people use database a lot. And retail industry was one of our biggest customers there. And I was kind of observing how they use every time a crash happens, when you fix it, you also get to like see how the heck they are using it, why the heck there is a crash happening, which made me more curious about this sector of ERP, retail industry, and the whole workflow automation. That led me to Flare.
I see. So you had insights into use cases in the fashion industry, and that gave you some kind of opened your mind and perspective on how you could solve a bigger problem. So I guess like jumping straight into it, AI, right, is a big thing. And I think every company is using AI on the planet at this day and age. If they're not, I think they're in trouble in some way. What's been the impact with Flare and, using AI to kind of maybe scale the company or scale your workflow or just maybe increase productivity? Like how are you guys found using AI in terms of improving something within your organization?
Yeah. So this kind of like for me is like bigger question. Some of them are more ethical and like coming from the security background, I care about privacy. I care about what information you share. Whereas actually fashion industry, no one is like as security focused as I would like to be. Like I have access to admin access to all my customers, Shopify and every other like platforms.
Right.
Trust each other. But when it comes to AI, I see it as two different things, right? While I am building for MongoDB, I probably wouldn't let AI build all my code because I need to, you are catering to thousands of like people per day who has very different use cases, who use the product very differently. That means you need to think a lot about edge cases, lot about performance. Even a millisecond performance impacts every user's experience. Whereas when I think about Flare, it's more product oriented and workflow oriented, and edge cases don't come into play in every spot. It's about picking and knowing where to use AI, right? For example, I cannot use an agent to fill in the invoice. Every time a user gets an invoice on how much they are going to pay for the factory, if you have an agent that just parses and fills your invoice, pays the people, say it makes a mistake. Now you are going to spend even more time at the end of the month looking through where am I missing my 10 cents. It's doesn't make you efficient at the end of the day. The worst case scenario is actually going to slow you down. But for me, the other use cases would be like you get something called packing list from factories. So when you make an order of, I need these 100 things to be manufactured, people send this whole 100 things in like an Excel sheet or a PDF with when it is going to arrive, how much is going to get manufactured. Before the era of AI, our customers used to have an Upwork outsourced person who literally take this sheet and key in the data into an ERP system so that you can
Wow.
start tracking things. Now they upload it, AI parses everything, prefills that a value, and they don't have an Upwork person. Whoever uploads the packing list just verifies that it matches it, and that's it. Boom, done. So that AI has made my customers more efficient and more cost effective. So it's more about understanding where, I mean, one day I do believe agents will be there. Agents can do things on its own. But the catch here is that there are a lot of places where you need a repetitive task to give you
Mm.
the same exact answer.
Mm.
If you test a repetitive task and if it gives you an answer in development, you want to believe that the exact same answer will be provided in production. And AI is not there because every time you ask the same questions, it can give you like different answers. So that's where I feel it's still not in a state where it's fully production and in production use for agents. But yes, there are other places where it is pretty much there.
I see. So when you've got a set of inputs and you need to produce a set of outputs, um, instead of just using traditional kind of like rules and standard programming, AI can take a place there in terms of summarizing that data and giving an output, right? So I think
Yes.
you've seen benefit with that.
Yeah. The other interesting parts where I have seen benefits and I'm using AI a lot is customizing your workflows. So
Mm.
every company, the way when you buy like t-shirts and stuff, barcodes are assigned is very different and unique to each company. But the thing with my customers is that they click the exact same buttons and do the exact same workflows every time. So I use all these MCP tools from Shopify and like Cursor to build those custom workflows in a matter of like an 1 hour and then give
Wow.
them the custom workflow. They test it out in dev. If the app works in dev, you know it works in production. Before the era of AI, you are left with three choices. One, either pay 100K plus for software engineers, build a custom software that just works for your company,
Mm.
or pick one of these rigid templated ERP softwares and change your workflow to match the template. Or the final option is like use point solutions which doesn't like sync with each other, talk to each other,
Mm.
and is always broken. But with AI now I can build like that whole custom workflow on top of a rigid ERP in a matter of minutes so that people feel that the software is built for them and they are not changing their operations for the software. Think Sam Altman last time was talking about like with GPT-5 release is like software on demand as a future. It's kind of like, I guess, a play on similar idea.
I see. But I guess the key thing here to mention is you have domain knowledge and you understand these workflows quite well, right? Where I think this is the thing with AI is if you understand what the output should look like, you can use AI to leverage it to your advantage. And if you can gain those efficiencies, if you don't have that domain knowledge or that understanding and you use AI to produce something, how do you know it's correct? And how do you validate that is out the output is what you're expecting it to be? So I think that is kind of a caveat with you still need someone in the room who knows what roughly it should look like.
Yes. And even like for coding, I think it's not a magic where you just tell ChatGPT and it builds you this customization, right? I need to clearly say that, like, hey, this is how I want my scaffolding to be. My
Hmm.
route needs to be structured this way. My business logic needs to go here.
Hmm.
My database code needs to go here. Why that becomes important is because when you test, if something goes wrong, you can't just keep asking AI and go in circle, right? It's actually more easier for me to know exactly where to go and fix things. Or
Yes.
even having an agent to make sure your linter is very tight. And every time an agent creates a code, there is another test agent that validates to make sure the lint is right. Code is structured properly before it commits to it. So, yes, I think when you see in YouTube, even like these kind of like coding and low code and all those things feels like magic. But in real world, to use
Mm.
that, you need to like know the nuances, creating a test agent, creating a coding agent, and then like having them interact. to have an effective way to build these products.
I would argue, do you need agents to do linting? Can we just use our linting tools?
So I do use the linting tools, but what the agent does is that it uses the linting tools and say, hey, if this code you created is not linted properly, then go and fix it. An example, I was just like an hour before this podcast, I was trying to make it write some code. It added a semicolon at the end of every sentence,
Right.
and that broke the whole code. But then my linter agent was able to say that like, hey, I'm not able to compile it. So use my lint things to check and fix it.
I
And then the
see.
code itself fixed it. But without that linter agent saying that if lint doesn't pass, I can't commit this code, it would have just committed bad code.
Yeah, I see. So you've got something that guides the other agent on its output, right? And that may not be in the training data set of the original agent. So then you need to kind of have another agent that can kind of give it feedback to improve its output.
Yes.
You mentioned testing agent. What does the testing agent do? And are we using AI to test AI?
Yes. So what I do is I create a very like MD files, like doc files, before even start writing the code that says this is my input, this has to be my output, and create like a bunch of unit test cases and integration test cases that obviously fails. So one of the thing that needs to pass for AI code is like these test cases needs to pass. So kind of like I feel like test driven development has always been a thing, but with these kind of AI writing the code, a test driven development takes more prominence.
Mm.
That is a bit like, yeah, you build and write tests, but hallucination, everything comes into play, right? Rather write the test cases, know what you need, and then let the AI build those business logic.
So the test cases, there's no hallucination in those test cases, right? They are reviewed manually that these are correct, and then the agent has a source of truth.
Yes.
That's really cool. That's really awesome. So do you see more and more development teams in the future kind of adopting these practices where there's more agents involved in development? So obviously we have tools like VS Code and agent mode and those kind of tools, which can kind of, you can give it a prompt and it can look through your whole project and create test cases for you. But do you see a case where more code is written by AI, but verified by AI agents? So there's less kind of manual writing of the code and more reviewing and editing of the code.
So there are two things. One, the field is obviously evolving and everyone is trying to figure out what is the best way to use AI.
Absolutely.
It has worked out for me right now. But if you ask a month from now, models would have evolved. I would be giving a different answer. But one thing that is very clear for me in the last month to 2 months as I use more and more AI tooling is that software design is going to take more prominence, and knowing how to test your software is going to take more prominence over coding. Because AI can write the code, but I don't know whether it's actually doing a very good job of architecture design. Yes, especially like when your software grows, when you are working on a big product where there are so many nuances to the architectural design patterns that get lost if you just let AI build it. And like I said, testing becomes important because the only way I have seen so far to reduce hallucination, make sure the code written works, is by starting with the test driven development.
I see. And so with testing, with test-driven development, you've seen the hallucinations improve. And is that because there's some feedback loop with those agents, or is it because it's generally just prompt engineering that's kind of helping there?
It's feedback loop. So a lot of things when I say these things, behind the scenes, I have like some custom lang chain or something that's running that just tells you go and fix it again. So I'm not just blindly using Cloud Code as on its own, right?
Yeah.
There is like these feedback,
Okay.
loops
Yeah.
to do it.
Because I was going to say, in order to remove hallucinations, we do need to have more of a knowledge base within the model, right? Whether that's kind of some RAG setup or some it's kind of pre-trained in the model somehow. So yeah, it's interesting.
The scary part about that for me is that I have this custom rack setup created by AI that just works. I spent a day creating this rack setup with AI, tested manually, it worked. And
Wow.
now it's been like 3 months. It just works.
Yeah, I think the tooling, I think what's happened is that the tooling, like you mentioned, right? LangGraph, LangChain, all these tools, they just make it so easy just to create a RAG setup. Or, you can start with ChromaDB and you can start adding some documents, and it doesn't take a lot of code to do that. And you can even get the AI to do it, right? It's so well documented and so well understood, more so maybe than some of the older libraries and technologies that have existed. So that's interesting. Yeah, I've definitely seen a lot of benefits with using RAG for like semantic search, and that can help in a whole bunch of use cases, right? So it's interesting that you're using it in that domain.
So, I mean, that RAG setup before all these things, I feel like the origin of how I started testing was that I had a manual QA
Yeah.
who tested every workflow I have because we came up with this schemaless ERP, which is customized for every user. So testing your flow for every user was hard.
Hmm.
And obviously, when Devin came up, I am curious to play around and stuff. One of the best use cases I found with Devin like a year back was to make it test visually.
Mm.
Then once testing visually passed, I did see I am burning out more tokens. So I asked Devin to convert that into a playwright script. It did a tremendous job. And then I started running the playwright script. Testing is the first place where I actually started using AI.
Wow. Yeah, I think with testing, it's so easy to see what, to measure the output, right, of the AI agent, because it either passes a test case that you want or it doesn't, right? And also the benefit, I think, of using AI within testing is, like you mentioned, visual testing. Um, Seeing what's actually on the screen. Do those pixels look correct? Are they showing visually correctness? Because a lot of these tools don't necessarily visually analyze what's on the screen, right? They interpret some DOM and they interrogate the DOM, but that may be quite different to what's actually displayed in the browser for someone. So I think there's a lot of leverage to be used with these models to use their visual capabilities.
And also, even like simple thing for me was like, I gave it an instruction that, hey, there is a lot of grids. ERP, if you see it, is literally like spreadsheets. Every page has grid. I use AG grid in the backend. So I told the test cases like, hey, I am using AG grid in all
Mm.
these pages and I want to test it out. It literally wrote every possible things from multi filters like equal to search to contain search based on text and everything for each and every field within a few hours. Literally every page and every field in my product had a test.
Wow.
I could not have written that many test cases and that many combinations without using AI.
Yes, you just wouldn't have had the time, right, within the time frame if you were doing that
Yes.
manually.
And AG Grid is such a common tool that it knew where to click. It knew how to look for certain filters, how to do like multi sorting, multi search, multi filters. I was mind blown when I used it for testing.
That's so cool. I almost feel like um, there are so many testing libraries like that, like libraries that we can test using AI. And Playwright is definitely, like, I think Microsoft, they're doing loads of demos with how you can use like AI with Playwright just to generate a whole bunch of tests. And I think we're going to see this more and more, like in testing. I almost feel like um, loads of people are putting loads of energy just creating tooling to help write tests using AI agents, because I feel like that's a really strong use case for testing, right?
Yes. And imagine like even when I have all these manual testers, I need to have 100 manual testers to test 100 different workflows every night. But
Mhm.
with AI agents, once I wrote a certain set of code, it was so easy to run every night.
Yeah, and you can scale it
Yeah.
let's say the workflow changes tomorrow because you need to change it. You can just get all of that code updated, right, very quickly. And
Yes.
and so I think the it's really interesting that you've taken the journey early with testing and using AI agents to do that, because I think there's a lot of people playing catch up with that in terms of their testing processes. So I think that's very cool that you've started off with down that route.
I mean, we are a three people team. We are forced to
You
be
have to.
innovative. So some things are just like you are not losing anything by trying these things out. You don't have the money.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I think sometimes like innovation comes from those limitations that are there, right? Um, I always think when you have the resources, you always end up being less innovative because it's easy to do the shortcut, which is just get a bunch of people to do some work. Where if you don't have the resources, then you have to be much more careful with how you use those resources, which means you have to be innovative. You need to use innovation and use the latest tools and take that plunge in that risk earlier in your journey up front than maybe waiting for someone else to take the risk, seeing their output and then trying, right?
It's actually interesting. Another point people usually ask, like, what is it being like a founder versus working at a MongoDB, right? I had enough
Yes.
influence in the MongoDB, but then I can't use these new tools just like that because it's a stable company, big company. We
Mm.
need to make sure the product is stable. But as startup, I have more freedom to take bold technical risk and try out these new tools. And especially in the era where innovation is happening every day, it's so interesting because now I can use those new tools. You can use new technology on a daily basis and don't have to wait for things to stabilize. Don't have to worry about what happens when something breaks.
How, like, as a founder and as a software engineer, how do you stay on top of this evolving field, right? Because every day there's so much information, there's so much going on. How do you kind of manage current technology in practice versus also keeping on the bleeding edge of what's happening?
So I started the company through an accelerator. That basically means I am in a Slack group with 200 other CTOs. So
Right.
sometimes it's just a matter of like everyone, we all share each other's learnings and it just helps, right? I would have noticed someone and my other CTO would have noticed someone and we just ping each other.
Nice.
So that's one way. The second is, like I said, you are just forced because now if you're so afraid of shutting down the company the next day, failing the next day, that you want to make sure you use every possible
Mm,
resources. You are on top of every new thing
mm,
so that you can succeed. I can't take on a NetSuite with the budget I have. Unless I am more innovative, I am forced to look out for these toolings, look out for this new technology. So like some is through necessity and some is just network of people who all like help each other out.
I see. Yeah. But fundamentally, it's you're forced to take the risk, right? Because the less choice you have, the more you're in a position where you have to make a decision with what you have, and that is, well, let's try it, right? Let's try the new technology. Let's give it a go, rather than let's see what happens, because we may not have the time to see what happens. So I think that is also the constraints that you have can cause you to make more riskier decisions, right? Which in the end can actually pay off.
And the other part is like you always have investors asking you questions, right? Would ChatGPT take out your company?
Right.
This thing. So you need to have answers to those questions. You look into these things because you need to get into investors meeting. You need to get into board meetings with every possible information to defend your
Mm.
current company that you just learn on that process during that process.
Yeah, I guess it comes down to the technology evolving so quickly, right? I do feel though I don't think the AI hype, I don't want to call it AI hype. Um, I don't think it's hyping as much as I think it's stabilizing a little bit, right? We're not seeing as much progression now. I still think now there is a little bit more sobering to what the AI capabilities are. So I've been hearing, when it first came out, there's all this AGI, artificial general intelligence, and I think we're realizing that may not be quite here now. It could be here in maybe 10 years or 15 years. We don't quite know, but I think there was an imminent threat of it's here. It's going to like take over a lot of workflows. But actually, what we're seeing is the impact of large language models, vectorizing, semantic search, all these kind of things that aren't actually AGI. They're just very useful tools for specific use cases.
Yes, one of the things I have seen and noticed these days is like one, there is more talk around MCPs, how MCPs can be used to build and like things around it, right?
Hmm.
For me, even at Flare, all my customers are in Shopify. Shopify is like the biggest e-com platform out there. They are a very big tech companies and have put in so much effort into making sure they have a really good MCP layer. And a lot of things I build fast with Flare is because of what Shopify has done with their MCP layer. And it is that I feel like that is making me 100x more productive than I would have done without these MCP layers. Agents running on its own, it's not there. So just understanding one, where is your risk tolerance, right? When I initially gave the example of automatically like sending money to your customers when an invoice arrives versus like just pre-filling the packing list. Pre-filling the packing list, even if AA makes a mistake, nothing bad happens. You can go and correct it manually. Sending money to your customers automatically through an agent, if something goes bad, it's a pain.
Yeah.
So understanding your use case, understanding where you have your risk tolerance is so important while using these agents while trying to make yourself more efficient.
Absolutely. What a great point. I think understanding also the technology, right? And so MCP, how you can harness that. You don't have to go full AI agent, but you can still use MCP as a way of ingesting data and using that to, in your system. And I think the risk levels are less, right, with having a fully autonomous AI agent architecture. And also, if you do have an AI agent, using it for tasks which are much more controlled and there's rail guards around the agent. So I think making those decisions is very sensible than just go, okay, we'll use an AI agent for everything, right? And seeing what happens. And then, so I think that's very sensible. And I do agree with you. I don't think I see a lot of talk and blogs on everyone writing AI agents on LinkedIn and on, in different blog forums. I don't know how many mid-level organizations and startups are actually using and deploying AI agents for mission critical work, right? I wonder if it's kind of side smaller features. I don't know. I don't know how much of it is like, how much would you bet your business on an AI agent autonomously handling some of your work? Or would you use it just for summarizing some data or
That's the other part of it, which I'm seeing is like, is going to evolve. My own thought process is going to evolve, right? One, when you talk about agents, people right now is just like, hey, I have this huge database. Let me either query it, let me either summarize and like make it more consumable through NLP. That's not the only use case with agents, right? You need to think beyond that and also think into the future. For me, especially in the world of ERP, I see everything changing. Oracle has been the biggest player with NetSuite in the ERP world. Two, ERPs traditionally has been like, I'm the heart of your business. I will connect to every other software you use in your business, copy over all the data into this one single huge database, one single huge source of truth. And then you can run reports on your database. You can run agents on your database, make sense out of its database. But imagine what has happened in the last month or so. If you are using Anthropic or ChatGPT, you can connect your Google Drive, you can connect your Gmail, and you can connect Asana, Jira, and query across it. And all this ChatGPT and Anthropic is not copying over the data. They are just using these MCP toolings and everything to query and generate the report that you need or answer the questions that you need without having to copy over the data. Now think of it in an enterprise context, right? You don't need an ERP that breaks with all the things in your workflow because now ERP can be an orchestration layer where it connects to all the toolings you use within your company, give you the same report, give you the same workflow automations without the headache of sync breaking, without the headache of ERP being like a one point of failure. So at the end of the day, all these are still dream. All these are things that's evolving fast. And often when I speak to people, they all think of like agents as like, I have this database, I'm going to run things on this database. I have this point, but it doesn't have to be, right? Think of what technology is changing and how it can have a bigger impact in an industry, in a domain, in some place where you really understand and have the depth of knowledge that a general ChatGPT might not have.
Yeah, very good point. And I think that is something that needs a mindset shift, right? With where are we putting who has the domain knowledge and how can we utilize that in a powerful way, because it all comes back to what knowledge bases do we have, right? And how do they interact with other systems to create a workflow for someone that could work? And I think MCP and some of these agents do enable that to happen. But we need, like you said, I think we need to think in those terms of there's not one source of truth. There's multiple sources of truth. So how can we tap into everyone's knowledge base to create a system, right? And it does require, sometimes I think, the organization is, the industry is very much led by lock-in. Everyone wants to lock you into their platform, lock you into their solution. And I think it may not be a technical reason. It could be for commercial and maybe political and other reasons why that may not fully manifest, because it may break someone's business model. But the technology is definitely there, and it can definitely be used in that way.
Yes, and that's spot on, right? If you are an orchestration layer, if you're using 10 tools, now you can plug and play with different tools without breaking anything. And you can even literally remove and try different orchestration layer rather than getting locked into a single ERP.
Yeah, absolutely. And it wouldn't take a lot to actually do, right? In terms of creating these interfaces, right, with MCP to connect and to ingest those data and actually work with it. And you could, do it small and gradually and build it out.
Yeah, and it's a slight deviation since we were talking about testing and everything. One of the other things I notice is that people feel I can create this custom software like magic. But the point they get lost is like, so how are you going to deploy it? How are you going to maintain package upgrades? Because sometimes with AI and coding, people think of, oh, I can create this cool app in like 10 minutes.
Mm.
But in real world, creating the app is never the challenge, right? What happens to the app a year from now? What happens to this app 2 years from now? How are you going to keep up with every possible upgrades that happening without a software engineer or without a people? So sometimes I feel like everyone is caught up on the shiny new thing, but there are basics that get lost. This is very basic. If you've ever built an enterprise product, the first thing you think about maintenance, how would it look a year from now, 2 years from now? How would it help you build other parts of expansion of your company? Those things feel a little bit lost when I talk to a lot of like people who are fully sold on AI. Again, I am sold on AI. I'm not denying it. But there are other parts that becomes more important to understand.
Absolutely. I think people think there is this perception, I think, that like you can just vibe code your way to an app, right? And that's what a software engineer does. They just do a little bit of coding and that's it done. But they don't think about, the security aspects, the deployment aspects, the performance, the cost, maintenance, and all these things like you mentioned. And, would I be comfortable putting my credit card details into a vibe coded application, right? Probably not, because I don't know what security they've thought about. If it's Shopify, I can guarantee there's a whole bunch of software engineers that are working on it. They've considered security in their design. I'm more comfortable with using that. So I think this is something that doesn't get talked about a lot. It just seems to be vibe coding is a cool term that, as someone who knows a little bit about a domain, you can build an application. But then it kind of stops there. You're right. We don't really show the real truth behind what it takes to create a production system and what happens when it goes down, who's on call, right? How do you do different types of deployments and DevOps, and if you need to use Kubernetes and then Docker and all those kind of things, which the actual coding piece is maybe the most easiest bit. And I think the harder thing is actually understanding what you're actually trying to build and understanding the requirements, because software engineers don't just sit at a desk writing code all day, right? You have to talk with a whole bunch of stakeholders and understand what kind of system we want to build. And often it involves some design and thinking about the design and the trade-offs and the costs and limitations. And that kind of work is actually sometimes where there's a lot more complexity than actually writing the code once you've decided what you're doing.
And it kind of like another topic that always I have been thinking about but don't have a great answer to it is how performance evolves with agent, right? I know a lot of startups are coming in this space of like helping you tune your prompt, helping you reduce the burn rate, helping you track how much tokens you are burning. I don't think anyone has won that space yet. in terms of testing your agent, in terms of sure in production, if someone does a crazy prompt and burn through like all the tokens,
Yeah.
or even in production, like what happens when AI is down? What happens when Anthropic is overloaded? So how do you handle those situations?
Yeah. It is a good point. I think I was reading this paper actually on small language models, right? Like actually, small language models are actually, some people think are actually the future. I think NVIDIA published a paper on it to show that actually it isn't about these big, large language models deployed by Anthropic and others, right? And OpenAI. It's about running your own small. Obviously, NVIDIA are encouraged to do this because they have a business model behind it. But it does make sense having smaller localized models that you don't always need a big LLM that, if you're summarizing some data and you have a prompt and you have some RAG, you can get some good results without having to always use the largest model, which burns the most tokens. It's almost like using a sports car just across the road, right? When you can just walk across the road. So sometimes I think we also need to consider what models we're using for what use cases, because sometimes they're overly used and they can contribute to more token usage. But you're right, there isn't. I think a lot of businesses, I imagine, are just eyeballing roughly how much they're spending on tokens. There isn't good analytics, I imagine, on how that's properly being done and what prompts are causing the issues, and good dashboarding around it to see what are the actual culprits of using burning up tokens. Certainly doing things with images and analyzing images and analyzing more data is obviously going to burn more tokens.
Yeah, and the point about large and small models is one of the things that excites me these days, is because no one knows what is the right model. No one knows how AI is going to have a standard that this is how you should use AI. This is how you should build things with AI. It's all like we are at the crux and at a place where there is no answers that you can experiment and figure out what makes it work or what makes it tick for you.
It's true. There is no blueprint, right, at the moment. There's a whole bunch of tooling. Everyone's trying to sell models. Everyone's trying to sell GPUs. But there's no blueprint that what works for your particular use case. So it's just about experimentation, I think, and cost, right? To see if you can really reduce the cost by using these tools. And if you can find a use case for it, and you can do it in a safe way that, like you mentioned with some of the use cases, which it doesn't maybe work. If you're starting to get it moving money around, maybe it's not the best use case at the moment, but I think it is. I think we're in the phase of experimentation, to be honest, with use cases. And if people can latch onto a good use case to see it works, then why not run with it?
Being in a startup is also an exciting time because you get to be at the place where you experiment.
Absolutely. I think it is an opportunity for startups to kind of leverage this technology. Like if you're running a startup now and you're a founder of a startup now, I couldn't think of a better time, because if you're trying to do this 10 years ago when we didn't have AI engineering and LLMs, and it'd be a very different world, right? You'd be looking at how you spend your funding on a whole bunch of software engineers to achieve very minimal compared to what we can do now, right, with AI agents. So it's an exciting time, but it's also a scary time, right? Because AI and privacy, like you mentioned right at the beginning of the episode, around security and privacy. And this is assuming everyone has good intentions with using AI for good. But it does scare me a little bit with how much data these things can start ingesting, and what kind of use cases they could be used for in like a negative way, right?
Yeah. I was talking to a bunch of CISOs recently. One of the thing that stood out to me is like everyone is like, it has become so hard to understand phishing emails, because
Mm.
phishing emails are now crafted by AI, which looks more and more like real emails.
Well,
It's
it's true, because
security needs change,
it's
right?
definitely changing. Because if you imagine how many people are using AI LLM tools or chatbots to create emails anyway. So how do you differentiate from the good emails which are generated by AI versus the malicious ones?
Yeah. Now, we need to come up, security needs to catch up. Someone needs to evolve. I know there are a lot of startups doing it these days, like use LLM to figure out all the phishing attacks happening through an LLM. It's it's all exciting times. Security is going to be one of the biggest field that has to catch up quickly and that is going to be forced to catch up quickly.
Yes. And I think second to that is also infrastructure, right? Infra teams. So if you want to, I think we're going to start looking at, eventually, I think token prices will increase. And then that will force, we talked about forcing when we have limitations on resource. I think forcing a lot of organizations to start to consider running their own models locally. And I think this will happen eventually. So there'll be loads more smaller language models being hosted. Maybe I just think it's going to happen when token prices go up, because I think they will do eventually. And then it's going to be interesting to see what kind of operations teams you need, right? What infrastructure teams you need to host these models, to keep them running and to keep them safe. And that's going to be another demand, I think, on skill set.
It's another like more philosophical questions for me. I don't have great answer. Like right now, everyone I speak to who use these LLMs and everything still know the basics of coding, basics of DevOps, basics of design principles. But as you see AI taking over, when you see the next generation of software engineers coming through and who don't have that same knowledge of the 101 basics,
Mm.
how would that evolve? How would they go and fix the issues that's happening? How do they fix a bug that AI creates?
Mm.
Because you don't have the same experience. I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm
Yeah,
pretty
it's
sure the
different.
world is evolve for that use case. Just don't know how that would happen. I'm just curious to see the different
Yeah.
wave of engineers that comes out.
It's a very interesting question. And this topic also comes up a lot when we talk about recruiting engineers as well, because sometimes we see, well, I think it's still quite common, right? We see very leet style code questions asked in interviews. And definitely that's been my experience, when I've, interviewed at other companies. They always ask you leet style questions, right? Algorithm questions, data structures and algorithms and all these kind of things, depth first search, breadth first search, all these kind of things. So the question is, is this knowledge actually important? Most people say it is, because you do want someone who understands this information so they can analyze output of AI and understand what is good code, what is bad code. So I think it's interesting because we're in a world where software engineers can spend a lot of their time using AI agents, co-pilots and things to generate code, reviewing code, editing code, modifying code, debugging code. But how much of their time is actually spent writing code from scratch, right? And it is a different skill set, I think. And the only thing that does concern me is, I think there was a paper published where if someone uses ChatGPT, their brain activity decreases quite significantly. compared to uh, compared to writing the code from scratch. I think in this case, it wasn't writing code; it was actually writing an essay in the paper they published. But it does make me think: are we losing our intelligence and our knowledge, and by relying too heavily on these tools to do some of this work? Or is that a bad thing? If we still apply critical thinking, does it really matter? But it does, it does raise concerns if you look at the brain activity. And yeah, I think if we keep going down that trajectory, then we're going to lose skills within the industry, I think.
So actually, it's funny. Like when I interview people, one of the requirement that I have is that they have to use ChatGPT or Copilots, because I want to observe two things. One, if someone is totally against using cursor and everything, I don't think they're a good fit for me, because
Yeah.
I feel AI is needed in our day-to-day workflow. But also, I have seen people who just copy paste everything into ChatGPT. Like you get a bug during the interview, they just copy paste the bug back into ChatGPT and be like, "Can you fix it?" And it
Wow.
just goes on in your loop rather than even trying to take a minute to look at where the bug is happening, what is the code. And that's also not a right fit for me, because I don't think you can just have ChatGPT do everything.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's somewhere in the middle, right? Where we've adopted. We've adopted new tooling. We're curious about new tooling. We're excited by it. So like, the LangGraphs, LangChains of the world, there's tooling there to help support our LLM interaction. But also there's critical foundational computer science knowledge, I'd say, or like data structure and algorithms knowledge, which is kind of like, I roughly know what good code looks like. And even things around performance, because, an AI agent or a co-pilot could recommend some code, and you see the data structure and you go, oh, that data structure actually causes some problems because it's using a list. Maybe it could be using a set, for example, and there's an improvement there to be had. But you would only know that if you understand some of the idioms in the language that you're writing in. So it's an odd place to be in because we require a bit of everything, right? We require knowledge of computer science, AI agents, DevOps, Docker, all these kind of things, cloud, AWS, all these kind of technologies. But fundamentally, we heavily rely on these tools to make us productive. So it's a very diverse world, and not to mention knowledge on testing, right? Testing's its own thing, and if we want to make a product stable, good software engineers should also know about testing and understand how that should look like, right? What is a good testing strategy? Unit test coverage, all that kind of jazz, and end-to-end tests. When should you kind of mock out external dependencies, and that's another realm of knowledge. So there's a lot of knowledge, but there's also a lot of tooling that can help. But the tooling can only help if you have the knowledge, which is kind of interesting.
Next few years.
Harish, thank you so much. I've appreciated your insights into AI, into how you do development in your org, and I've learned a lot from this discussion. So really appreciate it. Appreciate your time coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed this talk.
Thank you. Thanks.